video, I'm going to tell you about 13-year-old Antonio Barbeau and Nathan Paape. Before we get started, I want to let you know that I have put a discount code for the Crime and Punishment store in the description, and you can use that on any purchase and will be live until July 5th. Let's go ahead and get into the video. Nathan Paape had been living in Sheboygan Falls, Wisconsin with his parents. His friend Antonio Barbeau, also 13, had been staying at his house for a few days. Antonio had been sentenced to a local non-secure juvenile center, but he simply walked out and headed to his friend's house. They looked so young and innocent, but what they were about to do would shock even the most seasoned detectives and send a community reeling.
We learned more about the murder of a 78-year-old woman today, and the details are disturbing.
Even more disturbing, the two suspects are just 13 years old, and one of them is the victim's great-grandson. Jermont Terry broke those details from Sheboygan County this morning. Jermont?
Mike and Courtney, this case leaves you shaking your head. The facts of this case are gruesome. All along, Sheboygan Falls police said that the 78-year-old victim knew her attacker, but few expected to find out that her own 13-year-old great-grandson would be arrested in this brutal murder. Here's a look at the great-grandson. Antonio Barbeau is 13. With shackles on, he appeared in court for killing his great-grandmother, Barbara Olson, with a hatchet.
They intend to go there to kill her and to rob her money.
Nathan Paape is his friend and co-defendant. He's also 13. Both are charged with first-degree intentional homicide. The investigation shows they came to Olson's house, snuck into a door, carrying a hammer and hatchet. When confronted by the 78-year-old, prosecutors say they attacked.
The co-defendant, Mr. Paape, struck her twice with a hammer that he had brought, and then Mr. Barbeau struck her with the blade end of the hatchet with such force that it stuck in her skull. And
that's when they tried to hide the body.
They were trying to get the body into the car, which they couldn't do.
The criminal complaint says they decided to steal her car instead. One neighbor saw the boys peel out of the driveway.
Had just heard her car rev up and make a squealing noise with the tires.
Dan Mush now knows police say the boys ditched the car with the keys in it, hoping someone would steal the car and get blamed for the death.
I don't know what's wrong with these two kids, but they couldn't have been thinking straight.
Barbeau's attorney won't offer a defense, but claims the boy cared for Olson.
He had a good relationship, and so he's taking it poorly. It's hit him hard.
And to make matters worse, the prosecution says after the boys committed this murder and ditched the car, they went to a pizza parlor and had a slice of pizza and went home. As for Barbeau's attorney, he says that he's going to make a motion to get this case moved back to juvenile court. Tonight, the 13-year-olds are behind bars. Bail was set at $1 million. On your side, live in Sheboygan Falls, Jermont Terry, today's TMJ.
Afternoon of September 17th, 2012, Nathan Antonio asked Nathan's mom to drive them to the home of Barbara Olson, Antonio's great-grandmother. In their backpacks, they had a hammer and an axe. The boys had decided they needed money for pizza and weed, and they were going to get it by murdering Barbara and stealing her money and jewelry.
From today's TMJ4.
This is breaking news now on your side.
That breaking news now comes from Sheboygan County. A 13-year-old boys stand accused of killing a 78-year-old Sheboygan Falls woman. It turns out that one of them is related to the victim. Our Jermont Terry just got out of court and is live with the new details. Hi, Jermont.
Good afternoon, Melissa. The two teens are charged as adults in this brutal murder and the Sheboygan Falls murder of that 78-year-old woman. They are both 13-year-olds, and one is the great-grandson of the victim, Barbara Olson. Now, we want to point out that Antonio Barbeau was in court today. He is the great-grandson of the 78-year-old woman. Prosecutors say that Barbeau, who is only 13, brought his friend, Nathan Paape, to Barbara Olson's house with the intentions of robbing and killing her. The criminal complaint alleges the 13-year-olds entered through an unlocked door, and when the victim confronted the teens, that's when the prosecution argues that the teens attacked her with a hatchet and a hammer. The criminal complaint is gruesome. It talks about how one of the great-grandson used a hatchet and it split the skull of the 78-year-old woman open, and it took both teens to actually pull the skull out, pull the hatchet out from the skull. I want to point out that they also allege that the teens then robbed the woman, took her car, went on a joyride, tried to get rid of the vehicle, and at one point even ate pizza at a pizza joint in Sheboygan County after all of this took place. We are now joined by Antonio Barbeau's attorney. Again, Mr. Barbeau is the great-grandson of the 78-year-old victim. George Lindbeck is the attorney representing the great-grandson. Let's talk about exactly the details of this case. This appears to be gruesome. How would you go about defending your client?
Well, first of all, I would go about defending my client by clarifying what in fact did or didn't happen. People need to understand that what the state said today is not necessarily the facts of the case, not necessarily the truth of what happened, and it might be some time before the truth of what really happened comes out. But beyond that, I'm not going to make any comments about the facts.
Can you at least talk about the relationship that your client, Antonio, had with his great-grandmother? Many people would be baffled by the fact that a great-grandson, as the state alleges, would target someone that he knew.
The relationship between my client and his great-grandmother was actually a very good relationship. I think the facts and the evidence that will come out at subsequent hearings will prove that, and the family is shocked.
We know at this point, this is just a preliminary hearing today. We did not hear not guilty or guilty plea. How is your client pleading at this point? Is he saying that he was or was not involved?
I'm not going to go into what his statements are concerning his involvement. Today was the initial appearance, which was really just to for the courts to make sure that a defendant understands what he's charged with, what the penalties are, and what his rights are, including his right to a preliminary hearing. If the court makes a finding of probable cause at the preliminary hearing, then there would be entry of a plea.
Mr. Lindbeck, I thank you very much for taking the time to join us on this noon hour. Again, we are hearing that the two teens are now charged as adults in this brutal murder of Barbara Olson, who was found was found Wednesday afternoon in her home. The prosecution alleging that the crime took place on Monday, so she sat in her home for 2 days before she was discovered. We'll most definitely continue to follow this breaking news story and have details as they become available. For now, on your side, outside the courthouse in Sheboygan County, Jermont Terry, today's TMJ4.
Wow, gruesome is right. Okay, thanks so much, Jermont.
I like how the attorney said that Antonio had a close relationship until he murdered her. The original plan was to sneak into the house through a door in the garage and sneak up on her. But when they arrived at the house, Barbara heard them open the door and invited them in. She said she was going to call Antonio's mother to let her know that he was with her in case she was worried about his whereabouts. That's when they struck. Antonio delivered the first blow, striking her head with the blunt end of the hatchet. Nathan then hit her head twice with the hammer. Barbara tried to defend herself, covering her head and begging the boys to stop. According to the medical examiner, they struck her at least 27 times. The first blow was delivered by Antonio, who bashed her head with the sharp end of the axe so hard that it got stuck in her skull. It took the might of both Antonio and Nathan to pull it out. After they were sure Barbara was dead, they tried to drag her body to the trunk of her car and planned to drive to a wooded area to dump it. They quickly realized this wasn't going to be as easy as they thought, so they just left her body in the garage. The boys then ransacked the house and walked away with $155, some change, and a few pieces of jewelry. Antonio even slipped a blood-soaked watch off his great-grandmother's wrist. The boys then drove Barbara's car to a local bowling alley and left it. Left it there with the keys and jewelry inside in order to entice someone to steal it, who would then be implicated in the murder. They then walked a few blocks from the bowling alley to a pizzeria and ate their pizza. They bought their weed and blazed to their heart's content. Afterwards, they threw Barbara's purse in a storm drain and then went to Nathan's house where they changed their clothes. Antonio hid some of his bloody clothes and shoes in his locker at school, while Nathan tried to hide the watch and bloody clothing at home. Antonio went back to the juvenile shelter and acted as if nothing was wrong. He told the people at the youth shelter he'd had his fun as a runaway and was really glad to be back. Nathan simply went home. 2 days later, Barbara's daughter, Judy Offut, was worried because Barbara hadn't called. Barbara was always in contact with her friends and family, and it was very out of character for her to drop off the radar as she did. Judy drove over to Barbara's house to check on her. She entered the garage through the same door that the boys had entered through 2 days earlier. There, she found her mother lying dead with blood everywhere. At first, she thought it had been some kind of accident, but it soon became obvious that this was something more sinister. It wasn't hard to figure out who'd done this. Nathan's mother had been the one to drive the boys to the house on the day of the murder. Police searched Antonio's locker at school and found the blood-soaked clothes. They went to Nathan's home and he confessed to the crime. They also found the watch and bloody clothes. Prosecutors announced in January of 2013 that both boys would be tried as adults for the murder of Barbara Olson. Antonio pleaded not guilty by reason of mental disease or defect. Nathan pleaded straight not guilty. Nathan's lawyers argued at trial that he wasn't the principal actor, that his development was slow, and that he was easily manipulated. Nathan claimed that if he didn't participate in the murders, he was afraid that Antonio would kill him with the hatchet. Antonio later changed his plea to guilty and agreed to testify against Nathan. Nathan's lawyers told the jury that Antonio had met up with him after school and pressured him along into the killing. Antonio testified that they both came up with the idea for the robbery and the murder, and they both shared the exploits. Within 12 hours, Nathan and Antonio would be apprehended for her murder after bloody clothes and shoes were discovered in Antonio's locker. An investigation of Nathan's home unearthed more bloody clothes as well as Barbara's gold watch, and in a nearby storm drain, they discovered her purse. It was announced that the two teenagers would be charged as adults with first-degree murder in January of 2013. Antonio did enter a plea of not guilty. attorney had attempted to have his trial moved because of the pretrial publicity, but they were unsuccessful. As the trial date loomed, Antonio changed his plea to no contest.
Two 14-year-olds accused of killing one of the boy's great-grandmothers returns to court today.
The teens were scheduled for trial later this month, but now one has taken a deal and promises to testify against his friend. Our Beverly Taylor is live in Sheboygan with more.
Yeah, both boys were in court today, although separated. One boy walked out with a sentencing date, the other with a trial date. Antonio Barbeau walked into court looking even younger than his 14 years. 14-year-old Nathan Paape also came in, shackled, and took a seat. The crime they're accused of is the brutal killing of Barbeau's great-grandmother, Barbara Olson, at her home on September 17, 2012. One struck Olson in the head with the blunt end of a hatchet, the other with a hammer. Each blamed the other for striking her with the sharp end of the hatchet. Barbeau, who had pled not guilty by mental disease or defect, changed his plea to no contest.
Do you understand that on your plea of no contest, the court would find and adjudge you guilty? Yes, Judge.
The change of plea is part of an agreement. The prosecution is recommending he be eligible for parole in 35 years. Barbeau's family contends he suffers from mental illness, but Sheboygan County District Attorney Joe DeCecco said that played no role in his decision to make the plea agreement.
I could not subscribe to the fact that someone that has a concussion 3 years earlier somehow can't control himself to the point where he would allegedly, well, not allegedly anymore, he pled in, kill his great-grandmother. Sorry, I don't buy it.
Paape heard all the proceedings. Barbeau left, and Paape was left to find out his trial date and how long his trial might take. His family left the courtroom. Their message to Paape: they love him. Paape will be tried as an adult. His trial is set for June 17th. Barbeau will testify at that and then be sentenced in August. Now, DeCecco says the plea deal, if approved by the judge, means that Barbeau will be eligible for parole in 35 years. That doesn't necessarily mean that he will get it at that time. Reporting live in Sheboygan, Beverly Taylor, Fox 6 News.
All right.
Now it would be only Nathan facing a court of law. By June of 2013, jury selection was complete. 11 men and 3 women were selected. It would be one of the most shameful trials in the state of Wisconsin. During the opening statement, which commenced on Monday, the 17th of June 2013, Nathan's defense attorney, Chris Petros, told the jurors that on that warm September afternoon, Nathan had come home from school as usual. Shortly after he dropped his school bag on the floor, his friend Antonio showed up at his door. As the teenager sat in Nathan's bedroom, Antonio produced a hatchet from his bag. According to Nathan's defense attorney, Antonio then concocted the grim plan to kill his own great-grandmother.
Confessions of a young killer. A Sheboygan County teenager takes the stand describing how he and his friend killed his great-grandmother.
78-year-old Barbara Olson was beaten to death in her home last September. The suspects then just 13 years old. Olson's great-grandson Antonio Barbeau and Barbeau's friend Nathan Paape. Barbeau pleaded no contest to first-degree homicide and took the witness stand today against his friend. As WISN 12 News' Marianne Lyle shows us, Barbeau says the violent attack was all for money.
Not even in high school, 14-year-old Antonio Barbeau walks into a Sheboygan courtroom handcuffed. Tino, as he's called by family and friends, agreed to testify how he killed his great-grandmother, Barbara Olson, in her Sheboygan Falls home last September.
We were going to try to scare her to get money and then use force if needed.
Okay. And when you say use force if needed, was there a discussion about what type of force you might use?
An attack, I guess, to kill.
That was a plan Barbeau says he and his 14-year-old friend Nathan Paape started plotting the day before Olson's death. Barbeau said the two hid the weapons in their pants as Paape's mother drove them near Olson's home. Paape and Barbeau entered through Olson's unlocked garage door.
She knew I was on the run, and she said she was going to call my mom.
What happened next?
We got in, and then I looked to Nate and nodded and shook my head as in yes or no. He nodded, and then I took the first swing.
Okay, and when you say that you took the first swing is with the hand axe?
Yes, sir.
Barbeau calmly testified he and his friend took turns striking Olson.
She started heading into the living room, falling.
And as she was falling, were there any more blows? Did you strike her again?
I hit one more time as she was falling.
At any point, did you not have the hand axe during this incident?
Right after that, Nate took it and he used it, the blade side of it.
Grocery store surveillance video showed the teens picking up gloves and wipes, which Barbeau said was used to wipe away fingerprints. Here you see one of them casually swinging the bag. Trying to discredit Barbeau, Paape's attorney pointed out Barbeau's lies to police when first questioned.
He specifically asked you if you knew what happened to her, and you told him no. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
You were lying, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And Barbeau shared all of these details in front of his and his great-grandmother's family. In Sheboygan, Marianne Lyles, WISN 12 News.
Nathan was nothing more than a bystander. They argued. Antonio, however, had a different version of events.
News, Jason Newton joins us now. Nathan Paape says he went along with this scheme thinking it was a joke.
He did, but what he and Antonio Barbeau are now in the midst of is far from a joke. Both teens took the stand today in Paape's case. He's charged in the violent beating death of Barbeau's great-grandmother, that 78-year-old Barbara Olson. And from Paape's vantage point, he was following a plan drawn up by his friend. A suit and tie couldn't hide his youth. Nathan Paape takes a seat in a gruesome crime.
I was talking with Antonio about getting money. He brings up that he could kill his grandma.
Did you think he was serious?
No.
Did you think he was joking?
Yes.
Both teens say they got a ride to Barbara Olson's home, snuck in her garage door, but were spotted by Olson. He says when Olson turned to call Barbeau's mother, Barbeau hit her with the back of a hatchet.
She started to stumble into the living room, and he hit her one more time, and then she fell onto the ground, and he hit her once more.
Early Wednesday, Barbeau testified it was Paape who gave the go-ahead to begin the violent beating.
We got in, and then I looked to Nate and nodded and shook my head as in yes or no. He nodded, and then I took the first swing.
Paape says he was armed with a hammer and only joined in at Barbeau's request.
Why did you do that? Why did you walk over there and hit her?
I was scared.
Why were you scared?
That if I don't do what Antonio says, that he might try something on me.
The state's attorney keyed in on Paape's involvement.
Did you figure out at that time that this wasn't a joke?
Yes.
And yet you still went along with this?
Yes.
Do you ever try to get Tino to stop? You say, what are you doing? Stop it.
No.
Now, Barbeau pleaded no contest to first-degree homicide. Closing arguments are expected tomorrow. Kathy, correct.
Which was his turn on the witness stand. While he admitted that he had attacked Barbara with the hatchet, he contended that Nathan wasn't as innocent in the ordeal as his defense attorney was claiming. Nathan came to Barbara's home armed with a hammer, and with that weapon, he bludgeoned Barbara to death. He also testified that Nathan was just as complicit in the planning of the murder. When Nathan took the witness stand, he confessed that he did hit Barbara with the hammer, adding that he only hit her twice and only did so because he was afraid that Antonio would turn on him. He also described how Antonio had blank, no emotions look on his face as he repeatedly bludgeoned Barbara. At one point during the murder, Antonio took off his sweatshirt so that it wouldn't get in the way of him swinging the hatchet. Fond du Lac County, I probably mispronounced that, medical examiner Doug Kelly testified that Barbara had been struck at least 27 times with both sharp and blunt objects. This was the evidence that Nathan, armed with a hammer, certainly had participated in the murder. The entire courtroom fell dead silent as the gruesome photos of Barbara's body flashed on screen. Deep wounds to her head, face, arms, and hands were enough to make even the most hardened law officials look away. The wounds on her arms and hands were indicative of defensive wounds, meaning that the elderly great-grandmother had attempted to defend herself against the blows. She wasn't knocked unconscious by the initial blow, meaning she knew very well that it was her own flesh and blood ending her life. Throughout the trial, Antonio's defense attorney had argued that in 2009, Antonio had been involved in a car accident which left him with an unspecified cognitive disorder, which most likely played a role in his decision to commit this crime. I don't buy that. That's ridiculous. People are in car accidents every day and suffer head contusions, and they don't go and murder and rob their great-grandmother. However, this alone certainly wasn't enough to ignore the brutal nature of the murder, and certainly doesn't justify the actions. Defense attorney Joe DeCesto agreed that this type of crime cannot go unanswered and be explained away by brain trauma. In the end, the jury took about an hour to find Nathan Paape guilty of first-degree murder.
New today at noon, a second teenager sentenced for killing a great-grandmother in Sheboygan County. This time, the penalty slightly less severe. It is life in prison for 14-year-old Nathan Paape. However, he will be eligible for parole on his 45th birthday. It's 5 years earlier than the parole eligibility date his accomplice, Antonio Barbeau, received Monday. Paape showed virtually no emotion in court today and gave a brief statement.
I just want to say that I'm truly sorry for everything that happened. I truly regret every single thing that happened that day. Every single day that went by, I wish I could go back in time to stop everything from happening. That's it.
The judge described Paape as the follower in this crime. Barbeau and Paape murdered 78-year-old Barbara Olson in her Sheboygan Falls home. They used a hammer and a hatchet. Prosecutors said the boys stole her cash, then bought pizza and marijuana. Our sound-off question for you today is, should those teenagers convicted of murder be eligible for parole? Share your thoughts by calling 414-967-5304. You can visit us on Facebook at Today's TMJ4.
Antonio's great-grandmother, the daughter of his victim, offered a plea in mitigation. She contended that her mother would want Antonio to not receive a strict punishment so that he could have a chance to have to be a better person. While Antonio's attorneys and family were attempting to excuse his actions with brain trauma, Nathan's attorneys and family had argued that Nathan should not have been held accountable at all because he was allegedly developmentally challenged. That's BS. His great aunt told Fox 6 that Nathan believed he would be coming home after admitting to the murder, indicating he didn't grasp the severity of what he had done or considered the consequences. However, Judge Timothy Van Ackeren disagreed with both defense the defense is arguing that the crimes as the worst he had encountered in his 24 years on the bench. I've not seen anything of this nature, not even close, he said. As the trial was coming to a close, the two teenagers shed tears and asked for forgiveness, but these crocodile tears did not sway the jury. After just near 3 hours of deliberation, they found Nathan guilty of being party to first-degree intentional murder and sentenced him to life imprisonment with a minimum of 31 years. Antonio Barbeau had already been convicted of first-degree intentional homicide and sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum of 35 years. What do you guys think about this? Was justice done? Please let me know in the comments. If you'd like to follow me on social media or check out the Crime and Punishment store, all the links are below. To make a one-time donation to help support the channel, there's a link for that below as well. And thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.